I never thought I'd be writing this, but I need to get this off my chest and maybe get some perspective from people who've been through something similar. My brother Marcus is 35 years old, and he got engaged about 14 months ago to a woman named Jessica. Since the moment that ring went on her finger, everything changed. And I mean everything. Let me back up a bit and give you some context about our family situation. We're not billionaires or anything close to that. We're not driving Ferraris or vacationing on private islands. But my parents worked incredibly hard throughout their lives, and they've managed to build something solid. My father started a commercial property management business back in the early 90s, right after I was born. He began with a single small office building that he purchased with everything he and my mother had saved, plus a loan that took them 15 years to pay off. Over the decades, through careful investments, smart business decisions, and honestly just relentless hard work, he grew that single property into a portfolio of 7 commercial buildings across 3 cities. The business isn't massive, but it's stable and profitable. It employs about 20 people full-time, and it's been the foundation of our family's financial security for as long as I can remember. My mother joined the business about 10 years in, handling all the accounting and tenant relations, and together they built something they're genuinely proud of. Beyond the business, my parents own the family home where they still live, a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood that they bought 30 years ago. It's worth a considerable amount now, given how the real estate market has appreciated in our area. They also have a vacation cabin up in the mountains that's been in our family for 20 years, a place where we spent every summer growing up, and where some of my best childhood memories were made. And then there's a small rental property, a duplex that generates some passive income for their retirement. So yes, we're comfortable, we're privileged, and I don't take that for granted. But everything my parents have came from their own blood, sweat, and tears. Nobody handed them anything. My father came from a working-class family where his own dad worked in a factory for 40 years. My mother's parents were school teachers. They built this life from the ground up, and they instilled in both Marcus and me the values of hard work, financial responsibility, and never taking anything for granted. Marcus and I both went to college, and while our parents helped with tuition, we both worked part-time jobs and took out some student loans. We weren't those kids who got brand new cars at 16 or unlimited credit cards. My parents were generous but intentional about teaching us the value of money. After college, Marcus worked in finance for a few years before eventually joining the family business about 7 years ago. He's been learning the operations side, working alongside my father, and the understanding has always been that eventually, when my parents are ready to step back, the business would transition to the next generation in some capacity. I took a different path. I went into healthcare administration and built my own career completely separate from the family business. I've always been involved in family discussions, and I care deeply about what happens with everything my parents built. But I'm not working in the business day to day like Marcus is. Now enter Jessica. Marcus met Jessica about 2 years ago through mutual friends at a social event. She's 32, works in marketing for a tech startup, and from what I could tell initially, she seemed nice enough. She was friendly, outgoing, attractive, and my brother was absolutely smitten from the beginning. They moved pretty fast, honestly faster than I would have expected from Marcus, who's usually the more cautious and analytical type. But love does strange things to people, I suppose. They'd been dating for about 10 months when Marcus proposed. It was a beautiful proposal, very romantic, at the same vacation cabin I mentioned earlier during a family weekend trip. We were all there, my parents, me, my spouse, and Jessica, of course. Marcus had planned this elaborate scavenger hunt that ended at the lake dock at sunset, and he got down on one knee with our whole family watching from a distance. Jessica said yes. There were tears and champagne, and honestly, in that moment, I was genuinely happy for my brother. He deserved love and happiness, and if Jessica was the person who made him feel that way, then I was ready to welcome her into the family. But then, things started to shift. It was subtle at first, so subtle that I questioned whether I was reading too much into things. The week after the engagement, we had a family dinner at my parents' house to celebrate. It was just the immediate family, intimate and relaxed. We were sitting around the dining room table, and the conversation naturally turned to wedding planning, timelines, venue ideas, all the usual stuff you'd expect. At some point, my mother mentioned something about how the house would feel empty when she and my father eventually downsized, maybe moving to a smaller place or spending more time at the cabin. It was just casual conversation, the kind of musing that parents do when they're getting older and thinking about the future. That's when Jessica said something that made my internal alarm bells start to quietly ring. She laughed and said, "Oh, well, you don't need to downsize. Once Marcus and I are married, we'll probably just move in here and take care of the place. It's way too much house for you two anyway, and it would be perfect for us when we start having kids." The table went quiet for just a moment. My mother recovered quickly, laughing it off and saying something diplomatic like, "Well, we're not quite ready to give up our home just yet, but we appreciate the offer." Everyone chuckled, and the conversation moved on. But I caught the look my father gave my mother. It was brief, but it was there. A look that said, "Did she really just say that?" I tried to brush it off. Maybe Jessica was just joking. Maybe she was nervous and said something awkward. Engagements can be overwhelming, and people say strange things when they're excited or anxious. I decided not to read too much into it. But then, it kept happening. A few weeks later, my father mentioned over a family brunch that he was considering some renovations to one of the office buildings, updating the lobby and common areas to attract higher quality tenants. Marcus was involved in the conversation since he works in the business, asking questions about budget, timeline, and projected return on investment. Jessica, who had been scrolling on her phone, suddenly looked up and said, "When we take over the business, we should really think about expanding into residential properties too. Commercial is fine, but residential has better long-term growth potential in this market." My father, to his credit, handled it gracefully. He smiled and said, "That's an interesting perspective, Jessica. The business model we've built has worked well for us, but it's always good to consider different approaches." But I saw it again, that flash of something in my father's eyes, and this time, I saw it in Marcus's face too. A slight tightness around his mouth, a quick glance away. He was uncomfortable, but he didn't say anything. I started paying more attention after that. And once I started really listening, I couldn't unhear it. At a family barbecue a month later, Jessica cornered my mother in the kitchen while I was nearby putting together a salad. She started asking questions about estate planning. Not just casual, general questions, but specific, detailed questions. "So, when you and Robert pass, how does the inheritance work? Is everything split 50-50 between Marcus and Emma? What about the business? Does that count as part of the estate, or is that separate? Have you thought about setting up trusts?" My mother, always polite, answered some questions vaguely and redirected others, but I could tell she was uncomfortable. When Jessica left the kitchen, my mother looked at me with wide eyes and whispered, "That was odd, wasn't it? We're not even sick." Another time, maybe 2 months after the engagement, we were all at the cabin for a long weekend. Jessica and I ended up alone on the back porch one evening while everyone else was inside playing cards. We were making small talk about wedding planning when she suddenly said, "You know, after Marcus and I are married, we were thinking this cabin would be the perfect place for our kids to spend summers. We might want to do some renovations, maybe add another bedroom and update the kitchen. Do you think your parents would be open to that? I mean, it'll be our family property eventually anyway." I was honestly speechless for a moment. I didn't know how to respond. This cabin, this place that held decades of my family's memories, where my grandfather's handprints are still in the cement on the front step from when he helped my dad build the porch, where my mother planted the garden that still blooms every spring. This wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was our family's heart. I managed to say something non-committal like, "I think that's a conversation you'd need to have with my parents," and quickly changed the subject. But inside, I was reeling. The comments continued, becoming more frequent and more presumptuous. Jessica started referring to the family business as our business, when talking to friends at social gatherings. She'd say things like, "Our company has been growing steadily," or "We're thinking about expanding our property portfolio." The first few times it happened, Marcus would gently correct her, saying something like, "Well, it's my parents' business, but I work there." But after a while, he stopped correcting her. I don't know if he just got tired of doing it, or if he stopped noticing. She began making comments about the family home's decor, talking about what she'd change when it's ours, what walls she'd knock down, how she'd redo the landscaping. She critiqued my mother's furniture choices and paint colours as if she was already planning her own renovation timeline. At one particularly memorable dinner party my parents hosted for some of their friends, Jessica actually told one of my father's oldest business associates that she was learning the ropes of the family empire, and that she had lots of ideas for modernizing the operation. My father's friend, a man who'd known our family for 30 years, looked absolutely baffled. Later, he pulled my father aside, and while I wasn't part of that conversation, I can only imagine what was said. The most egregious incident happened about 4 months ago, during a family meeting that my father had called to discuss some business decisions. Now, these meetings are typically just my father, my mother, Marcus, and sometimes me if it involves something that affects the broader family. They're working meetings about real business operations, financial decisions, and long-term planning. Jessica assumed she was invited. When Marcus mentioned the meeting to her, she immediately started talking about what she wanted to contribute to the discussion. Marcus, to his credit, gently told her that this was a business meeting for people actively involved in the company operations, and that she wouldn't need to attend. She was not happy. She argued that as his future wife, she should be part of all family financial discussions. She said that keeping her out was excluding her from the family, and that she had a right to know what was happening with their future assets. Marcus tried to explain that it wasn't about exclusion, it was simply about business protocol, and that even I didn't attend every meeting despite being part of the family. But she wouldn't let it go. Eventually, Marcus caved and asked my father if Jessica could sit in on the meeting. My father, always the diplomat, and never wanting to cause family conflict, agreed. So Jessica came to the meeting. And it was awkward as hell. She had opinions on everything despite having no background in property management or commercial real estate. She questioned decisions my father had made, suggested we fire long-time employees she'd never met because their salaries seemed high to her, and even proposed that we sell off some properties to liquidate assets and diversify investments. My father listened politely to everything she said, thanked her for her input, and then essentially proceeded with the agenda he'd already planned. After that meeting, my mother called me. She was upset in a way I'd rarely heard from her. She said, "Emma, I don't want to interfere in Marcus's relationship, but this is concerning. Your father has spent 40 years building this business. We've been married for nearly 40 years. And this woman who's been in our lives for barely 2 years is talking about liquidating assets and restructuring everything. I just don't understand where this is coming from." I didn't know what to tell her. I shared her concerns, but what could we do? Marcus was in love, and anything we said that seemed critical of Jessica would likely just push him away and make him defensive. I decided I needed to talk to Marcus directly, brother to brother. I invited him out for coffee one Saturday morning, just the two of us. I tried to approach it carefully, diplomatically. I told him I was happy he'd found someone he loved, but that I was concerned about some of Jessica's comments and assumptions about the family's assets and the business. He immediately got defensive. He said I was being judgmental and that Jessica was just excited about being part of the family. He said she came from a family that was very open about discussing finances and inheritance, and that it wasn't weird or inappropriate where she was from. He accused me of being territorial about the family money, which honestly hurt because that's never been what this is about. I tried to explain that it wasn't about discussing finances in general, it was about the presumptuous way she was talking about things that didn't belong to her, things that our parents had built and still owned and controlled. I pointed out specific examples like her comments about moving into the family home or renovating the cabin or taking over the business. Marcus got angry. He said I was taking things out of context, that Jessica was just making conversation, and that I needed to give her a chance instead of looking for reasons not to like her. He said that maybe I was jealous that he was getting married and starting his own family within the broader family structure. That comment particularly stung because it was so off base and because it showed me that he genuinely couldn't or wouldn't see what was happening. We ended that coffee meeting on tense terms, and things between us have been strained ever since. We still see each other at family gatherings, but there's a distance now that wasn't there before. And that breaks my heart because Marcus and I have always been close. Meanwhile, Jessica's behaviour has only continued. She's now involved in some of the wedding planning discussions with my mother, which is normal and expected. But she's made comments about how the wedding costs should really be considered an investment in the family's future, and suggested that my parents should contribute more financially since they have more resources than her parents do. My mother has been incredibly gracious and generous with wedding contributions. Far more than I think is necessary, but Jessica always seems to want more. She's also started talking about the honeymoon they want to take, an expensive 3-week trip to Europe, and has hinted multiple times that it would be a meaningful wedding gift if my parents would pay for it. She's framed it as something that would benefit the whole family, since they'd come back refreshed and ready to take on more responsibilities in the business. Last month, at yet another family dinner, my father mentioned that he and my mother were thinking about taking a cruise for their upcoming anniversary. Jessica immediately suggested that maybe they should think about simplifying their lifestyle and being more mindful of preserving the family wealth for the next generation. I watched my father's face, and for the first time, I saw genuine anger flash across it. He didn't say anything in the moment, but later, he and my mother left earlier than usual. My mother called me the next day and admitted that she and my father are now genuinely worried. They're concerned that Jessica sees their son primarily as a financial opportunity. They're worried that once the marriage happens, things will escalate, that Jessica will push harder for control over family assets, that she'll drive a wedge between Marcus and the rest of us, and that ultimately their son might get hurt financially and emotionally. But they're also terrified of saying anything because they don't want to lose Marcus. They're in this impossible position where they can see potential disaster coming, but speaking up might cause the very outcome they're trying to avoid, which is alienating their son. I'm caught in the middle of all of this. I love my brother desperately. We grew up together, shared everything, and I want nothing more than for him to be happy. If Jessica makes him happy, then I want to support that, but I also can't unsee what I'm seeing. The pattern is too consistent. Too clear. It's not like she's ever directly asked for money or ownership of anything. She's too smart for that. Everything is couched in future tense, in assumptions about what will eventually happen, in treating things as foregone conclusions. She talks about these things as if they're already decided, as if the engagement ring came with a deed to the family assets. And maybe that's what bothers me most. It's the entitlement. It's the way she's inserted herself into the position of future matriarch, making decisions and plans about things that don't belong to her, may never belong to her, and frankly, might not belong to Marcus either, at least not in the way she seems to assume. My parents have never explicitly stated how they plan to handle the business transition or their estate. They've talked generally about wanting to take care of both Marcus and me, about wanting to see the business continue if possible, about hoping the cabin stays in the family, but they've never laid out a specific plan, and they're certainly not obligated to simply hand everything over to the next generation. They're not even 70 yet. They could live and work for another 20 or 30 years. The business is still theirs. The properties are still theirs, and they get to decide what happens with all of it. But Jessica talks like it's already decided, like she's just waiting for the paperwork to be finalised. I've talked to my spouse about all of this extensively. They've witnessed some of these interactions firsthand and agree that something feels off. They've been supportive of me as I've tried to navigate this situation, but even they don't know what the right answer is. Do we keep saying nothing and hope that Marcus eventually sees it on his own? Do we stage some kind of intervention, knowing it might blow up the family? Do we wait until after the wedding, hoping that maybe things will settle down once the marriage is official and Jessica feels more secure? I've lost sleep over this. I've played out scenarios in my head 1,000 times. In some versions, I'm completely wrong about Jessica, and she's just awkward or comes from a different family culture around discussing money, and eventually we all laugh about this misunderstanding. In other versions, this is exactly what it looks like, and we're watching a slow-motion train wreck that will end with Marcus getting hurt and the family fractured. The wedding is now 6 months away. Jessica has been ramping up the comments lately, perhaps feeling more confident as the date approaches. Last week she told me that she and Marcus are already looking at houses in the neighbourhood where my parents live, just to be close to the family home for when we need to be there more often. When I asked what she meant by that, she said, "You know, for when your parents need more help, or eventually when we inherit it." I just stared at her. My parents are in their late 60s, healthy, active, and fully capable of managing their own home. The idea that they need help is absurd. And the casual way she said, "when we inherit it," not if, but when, as though she's already counting down the days. I've started documenting these comments, not because I plan to do anything with the documentation, but because I felt like I was going crazy. I needed to write them down to confirm to myself that I'm not imagining this pattern, that these things are really being said. I have a note in my phone now with dates and quotes, and reading back through it is genuinely disturbing. My father pulled me aside last week after another family gathering. He asked me directly what I thought about Jessica. I was honest. I told him I'm concerned, that I see the same patterns he and Mum are seeing, and that I don't think it's normal or appropriate. He looked relieved that I'd confirmed his instincts, but also heartbroken. He said, "I don't know what to do, Emma. He's my son. I love him. But I'm watching him walk into something that could really hurt him, and I don't know how to stop it without making things worse." We talked about whether he should have a direct conversation with Marcus, lay out the concerns clearly, and ask Marcus to really examine Jessica's motives. But we both know how that would likely go. Marcus is defensive about her already. A conversation like that coming from our father could blow up spectacularly. It could result in Marcus doubling down, distancing himself from the family, and potentially accelerating whatever plans Jessica might have. So here we are, 6 months from a wedding, and the entire family is walking on eggshells, watching this situation unfold and feeling powerless to do anything about it. The worst part is that I genuinely don't know if I'm right. Maybe I am being judgmental. Maybe Jessica is just a person who's very direct about financial matters and doesn't see anything wrong with discussing future inheritance and assets openly. Maybe she comes from a family where this is normal conversation, and we're the weird ones for finding it uncomfortable. Maybe she genuinely loves Marcus and wants to be part of our family, and I'm interpreting enthusiasm as something darker. But my gut tells me something else. My gut tells me that this woman sees my brother as a means to an end, that she's calculated the value of associating herself with our family, and that she's positioning herself to maximize her access to that value. I hope I'm wrong. I desperately hope I'm wrong, because the alternative is watching my brother marry someone who doesn't truly love him for who he is, but rather for what his family has. And if I'm right, what happens after the wedding? Does it get worse? Does she push harder? In community property states, does she automatically get rights to things Marcus might eventually inherit? If they have kids, does that complicate everything further? If the marriage eventually falls apart, which seems likely if this is really about money and not love, what does that divorce look like? How does it affect the family business, the properties, everything my parents built? These questions keep me up at night. I've thought about showing Marcus my documented list of comments, presenting him with the pattern laid out clearly, but I know he'll just see it as me building a case against the woman he loves. He'll say I'm being vindictive or obsessive. And maybe he'd be right to think that. Maybe I have become a bit obsessed with this situation. I've also considered whether I should back off entirely, let Marcus make his own decisions, and deal with the consequences later. He's an adult. He has the right to marry whoever he wants, even if that person seems to have questionable motives. Maybe I should focus on protecting my parents and their assets, making sure they have solid estate planning and legal protections in place, and let the romantic relationship play out however it's going to play out. I've also considered whether I should back off entirely, let Marcus make his own decisions, and deal with the consequences later. He's an adult. He has the right to marry whoever he wants, even if that person seems to have questionable motives. Maybe I should focus on protecting my parents and their assets, making sure they have solid estate planning and legal protections in place, and let the romantic relationship play out however it's going to play out. But he's my brother. I can't just stand by and watch if I think he's being used. I've looked at this from every angle, and I still don't know what the right answer is. I don't know if there is a right answer. What I do know is that this situation has taught me that money, even moderate family wealth, changes things. It changes how people see you, how they interact with you, and what they think they're entitled to. It brings out sides of people you might never have seen otherwise. And it complicates relationships in ways that are sometimes impossible to untangle. If anyone reading this has been through something similar, I genuinely appreciate hearing about it. How did it turn out? Were your instincts right or wrong? What did you do? And do you have regrets about how you handled it? Is there a way to navigate this that I'm not seeing? Because right now I'm watching a situation unfold that I fear will end badly, and I feel completely helpless to stop it. And that might be the worst feeling of all. The wedding invitations go out next month. The venue is booked, the dress is ordered, and the momentum is carrying this forward whether the rest of us are comfortable with it or not. Maybe once they're married, Jessica will relax, feel secure, and stop with the presumptuous comments. Maybe marriage will change the dynamic in a positive way. Or maybe, as I fear, this is just the beginning, and the ring on her finger was exactly what she was after all along, just the first step in a longer plan. I guess we'll find out soon enough. For now, I'm trying to be there for my brother, while also protecting my parents and honouring my own instincts about what I'm observing. It's an impossible balance, and I'm not sure I'm succeeding at any of it. If you've made it this far in reading this, thank you. Just writing it all out has been somewhat cathartic, even if I still don't have any answers. Sometimes you just need to tell the story and hope that clarity comes from seeing it all laid out in front of you. I wish I could say I feel better having written this all down, but mostly I just feel sad and worried. Worried for my brother, worried for my parents, and worried about what the next 6 months and the years beyond might bring for all of us. But life goes on, as it always does. The wedding will happen, and we'll all smile in the photos, and we'll hope for the best even while preparing for the worst. Because that's what family does, right? We show up, we support each other, and we navigate the complicated, messy parts together, even when we don't know how it's all going to turn out. I just hope that when this story reaches its conclusion, my brother still has his happiness intact, my parents still have their life's work protected, and our family is still whole. That's all any of us really want. But that gold digger vibe I'm getting, it's getting harder and harder to ignore.